Hi, Jonathan Fields. Thanks for coming back.
It's so good to be back with you.
I was just saying that if there was ever a book that was great for my audience to read, it's this book, Sparked. Discover your unique imprint for work that makes you come alive. Everything about this, first of all, the person who wrote it, you know him, he's a good guy.
It's okay.
Yeah. So Larry David. Your you-ness, you're just such a beautiful open heart, but then this actual content is so good. And we're going to get into it right now. So what made you want to say these things? Like what led you to this? Like, oh, okay, I have to put this in a book.
Yeah. So the book is really, it's sort of like the thing that couldn't not happen at the end of probably about 2 decades of work. Um, last time we talked, which was like a chunk of years ago,
Yeah.
I was focusing more broadly on the question of what does it mean to live a good life? And that's been like a big part of my curiosity for my entire adult life. But a lot of it has always been wrapped around the question of work, and why? I mean, similar to you, like we have this kind of fascination. It's the thing that we spend most of our waking hours doing.
Sure.
And I trace it. It's funny. I was like trying to figure out like what's the real origin story behind this recently. And I'm pretty confident that the wheels really get set in motion for this whole body of work during 9/11 or right after 9/11, when I was living in New York City, where I had spent my entire adult life until about a year ago. And knew somebody, actually probably multiple people, who didn't come home that day. And it was a devastating moment for me, for the city, for so many different people, for all of the reasons that we all know. And I was sort of wandering through that time, and it brought me home to the fact that we're not made any promises, that we wake up in the morning and God willing we get to come home at night and hug the people that we love and have spent the day doing something that matters to us. But you don't know. And yeah. I started really kind of re-examining like what is the thing that I want to do with my life. And for me, that was like a really odd time. And I think we've talked about this in the past. I had literally signed a 6-year lease for a Florida building to open a yoga studio the day before 9/11. Ended up really trying to figure out whether I was really going to do it, in part because of what happened and because of like people who I knew who didn't come home. I said, yes, this is the thing I have to do right now. And it turned into an extraordinary sort of season of my life. And that season also took me a lot deeper into Eastern philosophy and traditions, which are steeped so much more in the big existential questions and in the pursuit of meaning rather than sort of a more fleeting pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
And that's always been a part of my inquiry. It's like, how do we wake up in the morning and do something that feels truly nourishing to us? And probably about 5-6 years ago, it started to become even more centered for me. And I started to really wonder, what's driving us underneath all the jobs, the roles, the titles, the industries, the expectations? What's the deeper impulse for work inside of us that makes us come alive? Is it as unique as like 7.8 billion unique impulses? Or is that just the way that it shows up in a sort of like a very individualized surface level way and can show up in 100 different ways, like in 100 different seasons of life? But is there a deeper impulse? And is there something that's kind of universal across all human beings? I had no idea if I would find anything or not. So I literally started deconstructing just giant lists of jobs and roles and titles and industries. And I was looking for like, what is the fundamental unit of effort? What is the fundamental way that we exert ourselves in all these different descriptions? And these 10 different impulses for effort started showing up over and over and over again in different combinations. And which surprised me, actually, that it distilled down to that pretty quickly, because I like to consider myself sort of like pretty unique also. And, I'm, like I'm a delicate flower who's like, nobody is like me in the world. And, but in fact, there is this universal set of impulses. And once I identified them, I start to realize you and I are similar in a lot of ways. We're kind of students of human behavior. Like we're constantly we're observing how people move through the world. And it starts to become really clear that each one of these impulses also has wrapped around it a pretty mappable set of behaviors and tendencies and preferences that form archetypes. And I started calling them Sparketypes really because it was just a fun way to say, you know, the archetype for work that sparks you. And I started sharing them around. And the response was really tremendous. People were like, this actually, it feels really valid. It feels really useful too. And I started sharing them with colleagues, with clients, and was just getting tremendous feedback. But I wanted feedback on an entirely different level. I needed to know at scale how real these were, how useful they were. So we spent 2018 building an assessment. Most of the year, it kept breaking. We kept having to reimagine what are the prompts, what is the algorithm, because the algorithm behind our assessment is actually unusually complex. It's not just sort of like a straight math problem. And when we finally released it out of beta, sort of like the world just raised their hand and said, yes, yes, yes. And as we have this conversation, about 600,000 people have completed the assessment, generating right around 30 million data points. We've done some follow-on research that's shown some just incredible correlations with things that really matter. And then like a mountain of stories and use cases and just tons and tons and tons of things coming into my head saying, oh, this is actually how it shows up in the world. This is how it showed up in my intimate relationship. This is how it showed up between like the team that I lead or between colleagues that I work with or with me and a client that I have or with a kid or, you know, in a school setting or in a career counselor setting. And this is a really long way of answering your question about like, how did the book happen?
Hanging on every word.
So, yeah, it got to a point a couple of years ago where there was literally the volume of data, both quantitative and qualitative, that was in my head was it needed a release valve. So, because I needed a way for people to sort of like to be able to just share it all without people having to go through me as, you know, one unique human being. So that wow. It was time to write the book. You know, it was time to pour everything that I had learned up until that point into the book and just try and make it as detailed, as story driven, as data driven. It's like just everything that I could fold into it to try and just share everything that I learned. And it kind of became like the, you know, the inevitable thing that I could not do. And then for me, it's fun because so my Sparketype, my impulse for effort or for work that makes me come alive is what I call the maker, which is it's driven by the process of creation. Like I make ideas manifest. That is the underlying impulse of the maker. So when I say yes to a book, then I'm just like all in because now I go into my maker cave and I take all of this stuff like that my scientist side has been fleshing out for years. And now I turn it into something real, something tangible, something like a social object that I can offer out into the world. And so it was a really powerful experience. It was also really interesting because I was writing the book last year, you know, so
right, during the pandemic.
Yeah. We literally sold the book. We took the book to market at the end of February. We had fast interest in it. It sold in the beginning of March, literally as the week that New York shut down, the book sold. And I basically, you know, went into my space of just saying, all right, you know, I have a family to take care of. We're all terrified right at that particular moment for our well-being and for the world's well-being, and hunkering down in New York City, which in, you know, the spring of last year was an absolutely devastating place to be.
I can't even imagine.
And yeah. And it was in a weird way, it was one of the things that really allowed me to touch stone, to like every day know that there was an impulse that I had that I could honor and show up and devote time to, that I could keep returning to, that helped me stay, I think, more centered than I might have been had I not had it. I mean, I had the podcast, I have all sorts of other things, but the podcast was also turned completely upside down.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't know if it would continue on because for 6 years we had only recorded in person in our studio in New York. So, you know, the book became this one central thing that was my maker outlet. So it served all these multiple purposes for me, which was a really powerful experience in a lot of ways.
I mean, it's just, there's so much to unpack. And I do want to say something about you, which is you bring so much presence to every interview you do, to every interaction you have. And it's such a thing to point out because it's so obvious that you integrate all of the beautiful traditions that you love, the work that you teach. I mean, I love that about you, because for anyone who sits in my seat, when you have everybody come through on a book launch or whatever it is, you can kind of feel sometimes that there is like this routine aspect to it, but you just kind of drop in. And I think that's why all of your work is so felt and received, is because of your intention. I just wanted to just mirror that back to you. It's just so loving and it's so kind. So I want to thank you for that. And then this book, I said, and I wasn't really just saying it to say it, it really is the book for this audience. Since you and I have met, we now have like 25 million downloads. And Jonathan, every time I meet someone, I'm like, great. So, let's get you doing the thing you really want to do. And it's like, cool. I have no idea what that is. And so I started this podcast to help people go do this creative thing, because I wanted to be a songwriter my whole life. And then I found a way to do it. It was so amazing that I could actually do this thing. And everyone's like, well, that's so cool that you knew that. Like, I don't know that. And I'm like, oh, so it's not just about having to figure out how you do something. Like, it's what the heck is it? And we've had Angela Duckworth here and Emily Esfahani Smith. And I remember both of them saying that 2/3 of the world doesn't know their thing. It's only like 1/3 that maybe knows, since they're little kids, that they love making ceramics, or, they love writing, and everyone else is just like on this journey. So what is it? Was my first question. What is it that's blocking us, right? Because it's such a phenomenon. I mean, why is it, first of all, that so many people are so unaware? What is it in our culture or in the way that we're brought up that keeps us from having access to that answer, first of all?
So I want to speak to that, but I want to speak to something you just said also, which is that notion that 2/3 of the world actually doesn't know what their thing is. I actually think that's a wildly optimistic number.
He's like, it's way more.
Yeah, I think it's closer to probably 98%. And there's sort of like, I want to deconstruct that, just unpack it a touch more, because here's what my experience has been, sort of like really immersing myself in this work for a chunk of time now. And that is, even those who feel like they know what their thing is, usually will point to a very specific job or role or title or set of tasks and processes, or a medium, right? So let's say you have somebody who's a painter, right? And they've been painting since they were 6. And they're like, I identify as a painter. I've known my thing since I was 6 years old. And then they're rocking on, they're painting, right? And then, God forbid, something happens in their lives and they can't paint anymore, right? If what you've done is identify yourself primarily with the surface level expression of a deeper impulse, and you stand in your identity on that surface level, then when your ability to do that ends or changes in some meaningful way, and it always will, it always will, then you feel like you've come to an end. You feel like you can't,
that's really scary.
Now the thing, it's like, now the thing that you're here to do, you can't do anymore. Whereas if you actually go deeper than that, if you actually ask yourself, okay, so painting, cool. Like, there's something about paint, there's something about brushes, there's something about oil and canvas that I love. And I know this feeling because I spent a season of my life painting. And I love it, but if that was sort of like the way that I formed the core of my identity, when and if my ability to do that changes, then I feel like no longer have I just lost a pursuit, but literally my entire sense of identity, my reason for being, has been stripped from me. If instead you say, what is the deeper impulse beneath this surface level expression that is almost like my DNA level thing, then if you hit a point where, like, you can't paint anymore, or you can't work on cars anymore, or, if you are a visually oriented person and your eyesight starts to be impaired on a level where you can't do it anymore, yes, you will still grieve the loss of that. But at the same time, you'll know there's a deeper impulse in me. I know what it is. And because I actually can identify on that level, I can now look back out at the world and say, what is a universe of ways, new channels, new forms, new media, new conduits of expression that I might find where this impulse can still be brought to bear, but maybe in a profoundly different way.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that third of people that, like you mentioned, my sense is a lot of those folks probably identify with that sort of like a time limited surface level expression.
Mm-hmm.
But I would venture to guess most of them actually don't know what the deeper impulse is underneath that.
Yeah.
So they're still going to end up in that same existential crisis when they hit that point in life, when for some reason they just can't do it, or they can't do it at a level which allows them to feel fully expressed anymore. So it becomes more frustrating and futility creating than actually joyful. So they step away from it, and then they don't have any sense of, well, what now? Which is why I've been so focused on the deeper impulse. So that was like a really big, I keep like taking us on tangents.
No,
I'm
it's
sorry
so beautiful.
for that,
No, and it actually just made me think of something that our mutual friend Seth Godin said to me. He's been on the show 3 times, and he's become like a father figure in my life. And I remember him saying, because people always ask him these questions, like, what's my purpose and what's my thing? And he said to me, he's like, when I was, in my young 20s, I thought I was going to be teaching canoeing in the West Canadian mountains.
Right.
Like I wound up teaching marketing, and it's because of what really is like who I am could be translated in either place. And so now what you just said, I'm thinking about from the perspective of people who listen to the show and they say, well, I don't get it. Like, I thought I loved to paint, but I'm not making money as a painter. And it seems as though for some reason people want to pay me to, I don't know, be a script editor or whatever it is. And I love this idea of like, well, if you can find what actually uniquely is the thing that's making you come alive, you might be able to do it in a realm that you could get paid for, that you actually could find so much meaning around, because you let go of this identity where you are only feeling fulfilled as yourself if it's attached to this one particular way of expressing it. So I love what you're saying, because I think that's what Seth was saying. He's like, whatever lit me up about that, I feel the same way in a room talking to people about software, and it's nothing to do with, it doesn't seem like on the surface they're connected at all. So then what is that? How do we find out what that is?
Yeah. And going back to your question, it's like, why do most people not know this thing?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is pretty simple. It's because we don't know that it exists, so we don't go searching for it. It's the reason I've spent so much time and so many years now deepening into this work, is because there are great tools out there to get a lot of answers. There are all sorts of assessments, like from Myers-Briggs to DISC to StrengthsFinder to VIA to all this stuff. And there's great spiritual process around it. And they're great things that sort of like, like once you identify something, tell you how to map out and build around it. But what I wasn't finding was something that was really unique to understanding what the deeper driver under each thing is, being able to actually have somebody walk through a process where fairly quickly they could understand what theirs were. And you could validate it with a ton of data, but intuitively it just landed as accurate. And that it was useful. It would guide decisions and behavior. And so we didn't know that these impulses existed. And frankly, I didn't know if they did or didn't before I started into this work. Like I said, I was kind of agnostic. I was like, wouldn't it be cool if they did and we could map them out and build tools to help people figure them out? But I had no idea. And I've done a lot of work, and I've explored a lot of different bodies of work, similar to you, from social science to academics to positive psych to philosophy, theology, business. And if I've literally like build my life to be able to full-time pursue and explore all of these things, and I didn't know at that point whether these things existed and could be identified, then somebody who's like working and living and raising a family and has barely any time to devote to these questions.
Right. Forget it.
Right. It's sort of like you're really starting behind the 8 ball there. And it's not a part of from a Western sort of like cultural standpoint, asking these kind of questions is just not a part of our experience in traditional education. It is more so in Eastern philosophy and Eastern traditions. But even there, it's changed a lot. So I think a lot of the reason we don't know is because we didn't know that there was something inside of us that existed that could be identified,
Yeah.
that was pretty universal and would stay with us largely for life. And then we were never taught how to explore and how to discover what this thing is. I think every once in a while people stumble upon it, either accidentally or through inadvertent experimentation over a period of decades. But even then, like I said, oftentimes they associate it with whatever that surface level expression or job is that elicited the feeling, and not with the deeper impulse.
Right.
And that becomes, and then the job ends.
Yeah.
And then like you wonder why you can't recreate the feeling somewhere else. And it's because you think it was about the job and it was about something underneath it.
Right. And it's so beautiful how in the actual title of the book and in everything that you keep coming back to, it's really about what makes you come alive, right? Like you didn't say like, discover the imprint that will make you the most successful or that make you the most money, or it's like, it makes you come alive. And another one of probably our mutual friends, Gay Hendricks, talks about like this zone of genius and like how often people just never even get a glimpse of that part of themselves. I feel like, sadly, most people go through their life, they don't have that experience of coming alive, like whatever that means. Talk to us about what you mean by that and how we can even get a glimpse, like take a little audit of whether or not we ever experienced that, and then how to like hold on to it so that we could maybe rediscover that feeling coming alive.
Yeah. So thank you so much for asking that. When I use the phrase coming alive a lot, I use it kind of interchangeably with the word spark, but I think it's also really important to create clarity around them, because in the world of personal growth, there's so much ambiguity. Words like passion have become so just like watered down, and also people mean entirely different things when they use the word.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I use the phrase coming alive, I'm talking about the overlap between 5 states. It's like a Venn diagram with 5 different states. And those 5 states for me are the experience of meaning, like what you're doing actually matters. You feel like when you're doing it, you have a sense of meaning. The second one is flow, access to flow.
Yeah.
And this is that state where you become utterly absorbed in the thing. You literally lose the ability to differentiate yourself from the thing that you're doing. You lose a sense of time. Sadly, the leading researcher in this domain, Mihai, just passed last week. But it's a really well researched and studied state, and it also leads to incredible benefits: hypercognition, hypercreativity, hyper efficiency. Like you literally perform at an astonishing level, but you just feel amazing when you're there. The third element is what the corporate world would kind of call engagement. I like simpler words, so I talk about it as excitement and energy. Like you wake up in the morning, and even if you know it's going to be a lot of hours and it's going to be hard work, you're really excited to do it, and it gives you energy. And the fourth state is what I call expressed potential. Like you're not holding anything back. All of you gets to show up: your identity, your preferences, your quirkiness, your gifts, and your potential. And then the fifth piece of it is purpose. And that tends to function on 2 levels. One is an immediate sense of purpose. Like what you're working towards and it matters to you. And then more broadly, that you have a sense of purpose in life, that you have this feeling like you're doing the thing that you're here to do. What's kind of cool is all 5 of those different domains are each well studied. There's a lot of academic literature on all of them that shows that they're identifiable and that they really matter. They matter to the human experience. They matter to your ability to flourish. They matter to your ability to wake up in the morning and feel like you have a reason for being here. So when I use the phrase coming alive or being sparked or work that makes you come alive, I'm talking about ways that you invest yourself. And that could be in your job. That could be in a primary role, like a parent or a caretaker or a devotion. Some people, that's their full-time thing. It's the way that you show up and invest your energy that gets you as close to the overlap of those 5 feelings as often as possible. And I really had to deconstruct that from my own experience, because I was like, what am I feeling when I'm in that place where it feels like I'm doing the thing that I'm here to do? And it took a while to really tease out those different states. And that goes to sort of like the next part of the question that you asked, which is, well, how can people figure this out? And that's where, like we stole away in the living lab for a full year and built an assessment, which is really designed around eliciting you recalling when you have felt those 5 different states and what has actually triggered it for you in different parts of life. And the prompts in the assessment we try and make them related to those 5 states, and also what I would call longitudinal, meaning I'm really asking you to reflect back on something that has been a through line for a long time, not just like a passing thing that you felt here and there, because we're trying to figure out something that is really like a core part of who you are, that's been a sustained thread for your entire life. So, the assessment was really the central thing that I wanted to create. That's where the maker in me kicked in also. It's like, let's create something that people can interact with, spend maybe 15 minutes, thoughtfully answering some questions, some of them which are not easy to answer. And by the way, the assessment is actually not the same for every person. It's part of the algorithm kind of watches how you're answering questions, and it will dynamically add specialized additional questions to nudge you to work harder to make more discerning choices if it senses that you're not. So that's why I said it's actually a lot more complex under the hood. It's also one of the reasons why reporting that we get reported back to us that it's so accurate, is that people kind of feel like, wow, this is spot on, and I feel seen. So that's been a big part of the work, is like to not just validate these ideas, but like, how can we build tools that will genuinely help people suss this stuff out? And then how can we make it accessible? The reason the assessment is not gated and that there's no paywall in front of it and just anyone can go online and take it is because it's part of my values, that yes, if you want to go deeper into the work, we have a company built around this and we have to sustain ourselves as an organization. So at some point, we're going to ask you to help do that in exchange for more value. But for the core tool, I just want that to be available to anybody, regardless of means.
Yeah, and we'll put the link at the end, and we'll put the link in the show notes. So stay tuned, because you'll hear where to find it. But I have to say, I love those 5 pieces, because up until I read your book, the explanation I had heard, or the closest thing to that, was like the ikigai, right? And the ikigai is really 3 things. And I wanted to ask you, because one of the 3 things in the ikigai is like what the world needs, right? Not about you, but about the world. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's actually wrong. That's a Western overlay of the notion of ikigai.
My mind is blown. This is the first I'm ever hearing about that.
Yeah, we love money in the Western world. So like you see that Venn diagram all over the interwebs, where it's like the thing that you love to do, the thing that you're good at doing, you skilled at, and then the thing that the world wants to pay you to do.
Yeah,
that has nothing to do with actually what the fundamental notion of ikigai is. Ikigai, like the way it's been described to me by people who I legitimately trust, is it's literally the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning, right? So if you're a grandparent and you're like, the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning is that you're living in a household with your grandchildren,
right?
You cannot wait to open your eyes and take care of them and love them and be loved up by them. And then you have like a close group of friends, and you get to go and hang out with them and share stories and ideas and like reflect on history together, and then maybe contribute in some way or volunteer in the neighborhood, right? If we take that, like, that 3-circle Venn diagram, and we overlay it with that, well, according to sort of like that diagram, that can't be your ikigai, because nobody's showing up to pay you for it. And maybe you're not super skilled at it, which is complete and utter. It's just not true. It's not what it is. It has nothing to do with that. Ikigai is literally, it's the deeper impulse that lies inside of you. That is your reason for getting up in the morning.
Right.
It is your sense of purpose. I've always wondered where sort of like that, the Western overlay came from, because you do see it all over the place.
Yeah.
But the fundamental notion of it, it just doesn't, it's not about that. It's one of those 3 circles.
But what is interesting is that the examples you just gave, while they weren't things that people traded for money, they were things that people did to contribute to other people. And that was really more my question, is how much of what lights us up because it impacts somebody else.
Yeah. So this is something that I've spent a lot of time on also, because so of these 10 Sparketypes, they all fall along a spectrum, what I call the satisfaction spectrum. And some of them are very fulfilled purely by process. Some of them are very fulfilled heavily by service. And then some are kind of lie in the middle. Now, if you're somebody, and the classic thing is something cannot give you a sense of purpose or be a purpose thing like in your life if it is not largely in service of others. Now, if your Sparketype lies on the side of the spectrum where it is very externally oriented and in service of others, the nurture is one of the Sparketypes, which lies on the extreme service side of the satisfaction spectrum. So you wake up in the morning and you literally have to be in relation to other people, elevating them, lifting them up, giving care, taking care, often when others can't or won't. Then for sure, like you fall squarely in that definition. But let's say, for example, you're a maker, which is my primary Sparketype, which falls very heavily on the process side of the satisfaction spectrum. I can like wake up in the morning, and I've done this for like seasons of my life, and I can, like when I was painting, well, actually, I'll give you a much more recent example. So 3 years ago, I took a month off of work and I vanished away, and I lived in this sort of like cobbled together, partially finished bedroom on top of a partially renovated roadhouse in rural Pennsylvania, where I look out the window and looking at cows. And every morning I would go downstairs.
Wow.
And I would spend 13 hours a day working with my hands, building, like actually just like constructing for the better part of a month. I paid for the privilege to do this, thousands of dollars. And what I was doing is I was working side by side with a luthier, which you know what is, but a lot of other people may not know. A luthier is a master guitar builder. And we were working side by side because he was teaching me how to build a guitar from nothing, an acoustic guitar with my hands. So I am laboring like crazy. Now, this guitar is never going to benefit anyone else. Like, for all I know, I'm never going to play it for anyone else. It's going to be a terrible guitar. It's going to sound awful. And the first time I strum it, it may just spontaneously combust because I know how little glue is actually holding this thing together. Right. So why am I doing this? And during that month, I felt more alive, more engaged, more on purpose. Like I was showing up and I felt like it was literally doing the thing I was like here to do, working with my hands. Right. There was like zero intention to benefit another human being in that. But my fundamental impulse, my maker impulse to make ideas manifest is so fiercely generative, so fiercely driven by the process of creation that I was completely and utterly fulfilled. And I would do that for the rest of my life. And a lot of the things that I do are focused really, really heavily on process. So for me, I'm deeply nourished simply by process, whether or not it ever affects anyone else. Now, does that mean I'm a sociopath and I could care less about other people? No, of course not. I love my family. I love my community. I love knowing that I can create tools that actually go out and make a difference in people's lives. That's awesome to me. That is an incredible benefit of what I'm doing. But if I'm really being honest, it's not the singular reason that I'm doing it. It's part of what makes me feel amazing about what I do. But the process side, simply having the opportunity to immerse myself in a process that I can't explain why it makes me feel the way I do, but I know that it does. That alone is phenomenal. And I have met, and I'm sure you have too, I would imagine, especially in your music days, right? People where like they would literally vanish and just compose or create or record for days and days and days on end, put them in a studio, right? And they love the fact that they're creating something that then goes out and maybe like other artists play or they play, and it brings community together and moves people emotionally. But the truth is, for that particular person, if they're really being honest, for a lot of them, they love that. But part of the reason they love it is not necessarily because it's in service of others, but because what that thing can evoke in other human being becomes a measuring stick for the level of craft that they have built around the process that makes them come alive. And that's what's really going on there. So it's like,
wow.
What's interesting is that if you happen to fall organically on the service side of the satisfaction spectrum, then all the sort of like the popular, like tropes fit you, and you feel really, really good about that. If you fall sort of like really further on the process satisfied side of the spectrum, you have been told your whole life that you're broken. That what you do and the fact that this thing makes you feel incredible, that it actually can't make you feel that good. and that there's something that's off unless it is entirely in service of someone else. And again, like, it doesn't mean that you don't care about other people. You do. It doesn't mean that you don't love the fact that what you have made through that process really affects other people. You love that, but it's not the core reason why you do it.
This is so fascinating, and especially coming from you, because I think you're someone who everyone, if they were describing you, like one of the things that's like right up there is like generous and like very altruistic, I would say, like right away. And so I love that you're like taking a stand for this, because I have this conversation with my husband all the time, and he's like very sweet, you know, like my grandparents are like, you know, Jews from New York, his grandparents are Jews from Chicago, and like the Midwest, it's just like nice. It's like there's no drama, like the Midwestern sort of all the stereotypes of the Midwest, right? And he's that way, and yet he's very introverted. And so there have been times where like we're having conversations and I'm like, how come you don't walk in the room and like be generous with everyone with your energy? And he's like, what does that mean? That I'm not, he's shy, like more on the shy side, right? And so we've had these conversations about, and he goes, it's almost like you're saying that if a person kind of just likes to spend time by themselves or just be a reader or whatever he is, like that's less ideal, or somehow like that person's selfish, or, you know. And you're right, like at the same time people will love him, like we'll leave a party and they're like, oh, he added so much. I'm like, he said 3 words, but he's such a nice person with integrity who's not pretentious, you know, like I guess it's just so fascinating what you're saying, and coming from you, it adds so much weight. And I'm thinking about people like Michelangelo or Tom Petty, who like pretty much fit the description of what you're saying. Like they're kind of off having their own experience. And if anything, we're just witnessing them having their experience in their flow state. But you're right. It doesn't seem like, oh, the only reason it was worthwhile, you know, to write Free Falling is because it would affect these people in the second row, and that otherwise I wouldn't write it. And I do think we live in that time where people feel as though feeling fulfilled and satisfied is not the question. It's really about how you have to make sure that everything you're doing is pleasing and belonging for somebody else.
Yeah. And there's also, it actually gets even more complicated, because there are actually really good reasons to be pro-social and to be altruistic and to give, you know, but they get layered into this thing. It's like that the work has to be service focused, or else you can't, you know, like when you're giving, when you're generous, it makes you feel good for a lot of it. It's good for society. It's good for human beings. It's good for people that you love. It creates the world that we all want to inhabit. That is amazing. It's also good for you, but for different reasons. You know, it's good for you because of what's been termed the giver's glow. There's a psychosocial phenomenon where we literally, our physiological and our psychological states change for the better when we are generous. Right. So even if it doesn't come naturally, even if that's not sort of like your wiring as your Sparketype, there are a lot of other reasons to be generous that makes society better and makes you feel better. You know, the giver's glow is one of them. So, you know, it's like we don't have to layer into this one thing, like the work that, you know, the work that you do has to be completely other focused in order for you to have a sense of purpose in life. You know, like it may or may not be. To me, it's more important to align whatever you do with whatever your fundamental impulse or effort is that makes you come alive. And at the same time, there's a really good chance that when you're in that zone without even intending it, even if you're on the process side, you're going to create all sorts of stuff that really benefits other people.
Yeah.
And then you can take actions beyond that simply because you want to be a genuine, like real, valuable contributor to a good society, to an ethical society, to a society that you want to inhabit. And also because you know that it actually does make you feel better, but for different reasons. So there are a lot of arguments to be a good person, to be a generous person. But to say to somebody who literally is entirely nourished by the act of painting in his studio, that that is not a valuable or a right. That is not right action. That is not a valid use of their time. That is a selfish act, is to literally deny their identity, deny their reason for being. And it's harmful.
Yeah. I've spent so much of my life being such a pleaser, like a concierge, they're just like my family dynamic. So it's only now in recent moments that I'm learning that it's okay for me to go do something just because it gives me tremendous pleasure and doesn't necessarily hold everyone's stuff or whatever it means. But for people right now, especially in our country where there's millions and millions of people quitting their jobs and desperately wanting to read this book and then hoping that this book will help them not only to find this flow and this place that feels aligned, but to be able to apply it then to work that feels so much more satisfying. How can they take this and use this knowledge to find a job that they can get paid for that inherently stems from this?
Yeah. And that is the ultimate question, especially now in the moment in time that we're in right now, where so many people are really re-examining. They're looking at the bargain that they made when they stepped into the world of work, often when they're in their late teens or 20s, and realizing 20 years later, oh, it's not making me feel the way I thought it would feel. And now, like, I've been reacquainted with the impermanence of life and the groundlessness that's around me. And that is not the bargain that I want to define my working life for the rest of my life. So on the one hand, it's devastating. And also because it's coupled with just like such a profound global health, health issue. And at the same time, the fact that millions of people are in this existential questioning, I think is actually a good thing, because
so much so,
it's going to lead people to your work, to like the work of so many of our friends, like just maybe some of the work that I'm doing, and help them try and figure out, like, what is the bargain I want to make moving forward. So, for me, it starts out with identifying what is your Sparketype. Or actually, when you take the assessment, there are 3 things you learn, what we call your primary Sparketype. It's like your strongest impulse for effort that makes you come alive. Your shadow, which is not the Jungian shadow. It's the thing that lives in the shadow of the primary. Think of it as like your next strongest impulse. Or there's often a more nuanced relationship. It's the thing that you do, you like doing, you're good at doing, but you also do it in order to be able to do the work of your primary at a higher level. And then in your profile, we also share your anti-Sparketype, which is the type of work that is the heaviest lift. It empties you out the most. It requires the greatest amount of recovery. So once you know these things about yourself, and providing they ring true to you, right? And I'm always somebody who says, no matter what assessment you take, whether it's Sparketype or StrengthsFinder or Myers-Briggs, whatever it is, no one assessment is going to overwrite what you know to intuitively be right or wrong. So like, you take it, if it lands true, and for most people with the Sparketypes, it does, then you ask yourself, like, the next step is not, well, how do I blow things up and then go find something that is aligned with this? First, you just look at what you're doing and ask yourself, how well or not well aligned is what I'm doing currently with this deeper set of impulses that I have to move towards something and move away from something.
Yeah.
What most people find, and it's surprising to them, is that it's actually not as poorly aligned as they thought, but they're not having the opportunity to do as much of the work as their Sparketype as they like. But the thing is, part of the reason that they're not doing it is because they didn't know what this impulse was. So they didn't know how to look for opportunities to do more of it, even in the context of the work they're already doing. Once you know what it is, very often people can look out at the work that they're doing. They can say, okay, so I don't have enough opportunity to do the work that nourishes me. And maybe I'm doing a little bit too much of the anti-Sparketype work. Is there a way for me to reimagine what I'm doing without making a bigger, more disruptive change, without completely resigning, walking away and doing something else? Can I reimagine? Can I job craft? Can I do something? What are the tasks, the processes, the projects, the products, the services, the teams that are available to me that would allow me to express this thing at a much higher level? And what most people will find is that those things do exist. You may have to do a little bit of work and a little bit of figuring out and be creative, and sometimes step outside of the confines of your job description to make it happen, but very often you can on a level that lets you literally reimagine what you're doing to give you so much more. Because now for the first time in your life, you actually understand what to look to do more of and what to look to do less of to get the feeling that you want to have. So the first step, first discover what your spark type is. Second, do a bit of a diagnostic with the work you're currently doing. Third, see if you can actually do some reimagining and reinventing, because that will very often get you way closer to that feeling that you want to feel. And then you don't have to go through the process of blowing everything up and all the disruption that very often comes with that, especially if you're doing it in the middle years of your life where you have responsibilities and expenses and people looking to you for a sense of stability or security. And you also very likely have some level of a sacred value built around security and financial stability. And you want to honor that, and this lets you actually honor that value, but reimagine what you're doing. Now, you still may get to that point and say, it's better for sure, but I'm still not there.
Yeah.
So then to me, I still don't think the next step is to blow it up and look for another job. Then it's, okay, so what can I do outside of the context of my paid work, right? What are the activities, the roles, the devotions that I might say yes to or create or build on the side, whether it becomes a side hustle or not, that would simply allow me a conduit to express this thing that is so important for me and that has to get out for me to feel okay in the world. The blend of that for a lot of people actually gets them fully there. And they're actually really, really happy because now they can honor that value of financial security. Their job is optimized, so it's way better than it was. And the complement of the other stuff makes the whole blend of it feel really good. Now, you may still get to that point and say, I'm still not quite there. And that becomes the moment where you turn out to the world and you say, okay, so what else might I look for? And the cool thing about this is two things. One, when you start to look for something new from that place, you're now stepping into the search process from a place of deeper self-awareness and self-knowledge, from a place not of victimhood, but of agency and control and intentionality. Whereas if you did it as the first step out, most people would leave from a place of dejection, futility, lack of self-awareness, and victimhood. And you're going to transmit that energy in the process of trying to find something new. And it's going to create a completely different environment for you when you're interacting with people. And then when you say, okay, so well, what job should I look for? Like if I'm a maker, what job should I look for? What industry should I look at? So here's the cool thing about that. Because you know the fundamental impulse, for you, the most important thing is I need to be in a position, in an industry, in a company, on a team, working on a product or service where I have a substantial ability to show up and be immersed in the process of ideation and creation. Because you know that that is central to you, instead of being constrained by some arbitrary list of jobs, you get to actually look at the universe of opportunities and say, what will allow me to express this impulse? So if you want to, like build a barn or be in a home construction, if you want to work on this space shuttle, if you want to paint pictures, if you want to work on a team coding, all different domains, all different skill sets, they all involve the same impulse. So the universe of possibilities becomes so much vaster to you. So rather than some limitation or artificial constraint, what operating on this level gives you is freedom that you didn't have before. And that means that you may actually have to work a little bit harder in the beginning because there's no obvious short list of things to start checking boxes from. But the bigger, longer term thing is that you actually have so much more freedom to explore nearly anything that you want to do and bring that impulse to it.
Yeah, that's what I was just feeling is the freedom, because we'll do these programs and in 12 weeks, people want to figure out an idea and then see if they can build it into a side hustle of some kind. And they're so stuck, like you were saying earlier, on this one attribute of how it maybe was supposed to look versus the impulse versus what's at the root of it. And if you just take the root of it, you could apply that to so many things that you could, like you said, apply it to the job you already have in a different way, or even do it somewhere on the side of what you're doing and then just continue to mosey along, actually now liking what you're doing differently because you at least have the outlet for it. But explain a little bit more about what you mean when you say, because for those of us, you have to go read the book, everybody, but when you talk about these impulses, because you've used like maker as a example of one, and I read some of the books. I know there's the Maven and there's the Nurturer, and you mentioned that one. But I think I want people to understand what you mean by impulses, because if you hear maker, you could hear that as that one in particular is also like a type of work, right? But you really, there's something about the sage, the essentialist, like what was one question right now before we take the assessment, which everyone will go do, we'll give them the link, that helps us understand what you mean by impulse versus a category of work.
Yeah. So here's one sort of like way to frame it. That tends to resonate with a lot of people. If you think back to the time that you were like your youngest memories, like where you would wake up in the morning and do something that required substantial amount of effort over an extended period of time. You weren't get paid for it. Like you're 8 years old. This is not your job. There's no W-2 that you get for it at the end of the day. But you literally wake up in the morning, and if given the opportunity to do it, you will say yes, and you'll work really hard. You wouldn't call it work as a kid, but functionally, you're actually investing a lot of effort in this thing for no other reason than the feeling that it gives you, right? And then you start to ask yourself, well, sort of like what was underneath that? Like if I deconstruct like the activity, like what were the fundamental things that I was doing that gave me that feeling? And you sort of like, it's a process of stripping down. It's not the easiest process or a straightforward process. It's just one of the reasons we developed the assessment, to try and just facilitate that experience and make it a whole lot more straightforward and direct and easy for people. Because you could for sure go through a process of real self-inquiry and mapping and journaling, therapy, spiritual process, a lot of questioning, deep discovery. And I don't discount any of that. I think it's incredibly valuable. And at the same time, we're trying to come at it and basically say, what were the things that you lost yourself in? And that's another prompt that you can ask yourself. What is a through line where for your entire life, like what is the thing that you do where you lose time? And it's not the thing where you're just like napping and you lose time. But what is the thing that you do where you are investing a meaningful amount of effort over an extended period of time and you lose time doing it? And the challenge is when we start to ask those questions, that's a beginning. But like we talked about earlier in our conversation, for most people, the immediate answer is the superficial expression of something, not the deeper impulse. And then the process is, how do we go deeper than that? Like what is actually existing underneath that that's more sustained and applicable to what we do in the world?
Yeah. And what I love about this is for somebody, because so many people come to us saying, I want to quit my job and I need to be able to replace this income. And what I love about this is if you really got at the heart of what the impulse is, and then you also found something that you can make money at, you could just find that aspect of that, right? Like that's what's so brilliant about it, because you're right. It's not about the superficial. Because I meet people all the time who say, I love music, but their songwriting just isn't phenomenal. It's like, well, you could have a job where you listen to music all day long. You could be a music supervisor working on, a Shonda Rhimes show. It's like, I can. It's like, yeah, what's the actual part you love? It doesn't have to look like this other thing that I was like, it doesn't? It's like, no, there's so many other things. But you're right. That's not something that we've teased apart. This book is so good. And I have to touch on your podcast before you leave. So I want to talk about your podcast for a minute. But everyone, you're going to get this book. You're going to love this book. When I first saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the book I wish I would have even thought to write. It's so good. And it's so intricate that you're going to love it. And we'll put the link, like I said, to the assessment. Jonathan happens to have one of the most phenomenal podcasts. I think it's, one of the first podcasts I ever listened to ever. And you were early to the party. When did you start your podcast?
Yeah, so Good Life Project started in 2012 as a video series. And then we transitioned to audio in 2014, I want to say. And then we completely wrapped the video and just went all in on the podcast side. When everyone thought that podcasting was dying, they were like, why would you ever do that? You have like a video show that's growing really rapidly, you have a big audience, and you're going to shut that down to go to a dying medium. And I was like, that is exactly what I'm going to do.
It seemed to work out okay for you.
Yeah, I got lucky.
No, you didn't, but maybe there's a little bit of mazel in it. Why do you think that the show has been so successful? What do you think it is at the heart of the show that lands with people in such a sincere, deep way?
Mm. Yeah, we've tried to tease that out over the years. Because when we started, there were, I don't know, 100,000 shows. Now there's something like 5 million shows.
Yeah,
And we've been very fortunate in being able to ride the wave through the years,
always.
and
Yep.
sustain a community and an audience. Um, you know, it's funny because I thought about this a lot on and off over the years. And I often wonder what it is, because there are plenty of interview shows. I mean, like, you have a phenomenal show. You're so good at what you do. Like, I love listening to you because you always come at things differently and you bring your own background in. And I love that you bring your own personal evolution into what's happening, so that it reflects in the conversation. And I think part of it, like, it's hard for me to talk about myself. So I'm going to talk a little bit more generally, if that's okay. And I think, like, the thing that would sustain a quote interview format show in an ecosystem, which is so jam-packed with shows right now, is a sense of authenticity. Like, I'm not showing up because I'm checking a box and because I happen to have a show, and I'm obligated to do it. I'm genuinely interested in the question that created it. And the question that created it is, what does it mean to live a good life? So for me, the fact that I don't choose people because they have big audiences and they're going to help me grow my show and promote it. I don't, like, all the stuff that, that's never been my bent. So when I sit down with somebody, I find somebody who I consider to be an embodied teacher. What I mean by that is somebody who hasn't just written the book or given the TED talk, but somebody where, when you look at their lives, there's something about the way that they're living and the choices that they're making that tells you they've figured something out. And that may be, like, a world-class researcher. It may be somebody who's, the top of their industry. It may be like my next door neighbor. I don't care how famous or not famous you are, how accomplished by traditional standards you are. What I care is that there's something that you're showing me by the way that you're living your life that says you figured something out, and I want to know what that is. So I sit down from a place of genuine curiosity. And I also sit down with the expectation that everybody can be my teacher. I could care less about what your pedigree is or what your background or your history is. Like, there is no person on this planet who cannot be my teacher. And so I think, you have to sit down with a sense of humility too, and a presence. And I think also, having been on the other side of the mic many, many times over the years now too, we prepare a lot. I have a team. I'm very fortunate at this point. We've been doing it long enough. We have, like, an incredible team that I work with that helps me show up in the best possible way. And we show up prepared, and ready to actually do the work. And I think that's really important too, because that people read that in you. And there's one other thing that I'm going to speak to that I actually don't think I've ever shared, and maybe this is about me, that may be unique to me. And as you can gather, I'm really uncomfortable talking about this stuff when it comes to me. But so I have a decade, I guess more than a decade long meditation and breath practice right now. I didn't come to it because I wanted to. I came to it because I was going through something really hard and I was trying to hold myself together. What started as something that helped me get to sort of like from feeling really broken to baseline has over the years become a practice of just really profound access to equanimity, and the ability to be present and not distracted, and to really be with someone, whether it's in person or whether it's like, over thousands of miles, like we're separated right now. And I feel like sometimes that's palpable. People can sense that. I'm not checking boxes. I'm not going down a laundry list of pre-made questions. I'm just trying to get to the end. And I think guests feel that. I think you do this really well with your
Oh,
guests.
thank you.
You know, you're so present with people that they feel it and they want to come back, and they feel like you've created a container where you feel seen and held. And I think that's rare, you know, because it takes real devotion and it takes the building of craft to be able to do that. And I think that is in the space can be a real distinguisher too. So I don't know what the whole like compilation of things that would make me or our show, you know, like continue to flourish on the level that it has for so long. But I think those are some of the things that tend to show up that really would differentiate someone in the space.
Yeah, you just brought tears to my eyes. That's so true. And it's exactly what I said about you about 30 seconds into today. And I've been a student of John Kabat-Zinn's for so long. And the only other person who reminds me of him besides him is you. There's just something, you're just good. You have a goodness. And there's a lot of nice people, but not a lot of people are good. And it's just amazing. It's so simple. And it's just not something that we get to even like witness a lot of time. And that's what it is. There's this calm, quiet, gentle, loving, safe space. And then when you talk to people, they just feel like they can talk. So it's really just so awesome. And I'm so excited for you that you are putting this book in the world, because it's really like taking your seat in such a big way. And
Yeah, it's a little bit terrifying too.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
I mean, I've written a bunch of books before, but most of them have been sort of like, this is my take on the work of a lot of other people. This is how I put it together. This is the first thing that is literally entirely my own, completely new body of work. So it's exposure on a level that I normally don't go to, and it's been interesting.
Oh, it's so good for you, and it's so good for us to get to be a part of it. So, all right, well, you all have to go subscribe to the Good Life Project. You probably are already, but if you're not, you're going to love it. So you're welcome for that. And Jonathan, tell us where we can find this book and where we can just keep following along with you.
Yeah, so I'm just at Jonathan Fields pretty much everywhere on the interwebs and the mobile devices. If you want to take the Sparketype assessment, it's just sparketype.com and Good Life Project podcast. And the book is available at booksellers all over the world.
Amazing. Thank you. It's so good. I can't wait. I'm like halfway through reading it, but I haven't taken the assessment yet. And I'm like, oh my God, the first thing I'm doing when I get on is I'm going to go do this assessment. So if you guys go and do the assessment, do me a favor and DM me on Instagram. And if you find it helpful, send it to your friends and post about it on your Instagram stories and tag Jonathan so he can see which Sparketype you are, because I want to know. Jonathan, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really been so much fun.